mash and a roving blade. I've got silver in my pockets, and I follow the roving trade. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey, 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 Nancy, oh. I went down through Galway City, Nancy whiskey I chanced to smell. I went in, sat down beside her. 7 long years I've loved her well. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey, 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 Nancy, oh. The more I kissed her, the more I loved her. The more I kissed her, the more she smiled. Soon I forgot my...
What is bourbon? Well, the answer starts here, with Kentucky's abundance of springs and streams. Because the water flows over limestone, it's clean, high in calcium and low in iron. It tastes good, and it's ideal for making whiskey. The other primary ingredient in bourbon is grain, mostly corn, most of it grown in Kentucky or nearby Indiana. Other grains, including rye, wheat, and barley, are used with the corn. No mere container, the white oak barrel is an equal partner in the bourbon-making process. As the whiskey ages, it absorbs sugars and other components from the wood. The final ingredient is yeast. Distillers protect their particular yeast strains jealously and nurture them carefully because each strain imparts a slightly different flavor. At the distillery, the grains are measured out, ground, mixed with water, and cooked to convert the starch into sugar. This mixture is called the mash. After cooking, chilled water is used to cool the mash down to the ideal temperature for fermenting. The mash is fermented in huge vats. The older ones are cypress. The new ones are stainless steel. Yeast is added and fermentation begins. Yeast is a microorganism. It eats sugar and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. The CO2 is why it bubbles. In 3 or 4 days, the fermentation is complete. The new whiskey is then reduced with water to between 50 and 60% alcohol and put into barrels. The full barrels are put into warehouses where they stay while the whiskey matures, 4 to 6 years in most cases. Right now, approximately 200 million gallons of bourbon are aging in Kentucky warehouses. Imagine a 61-acre lake, 10 feet deep, full of bourbon. When the whiskey is mature, the barrels are dumped. The whiskey is cold filtered and water is added to reduce its alcohol content to between 40 and 50%. Then it's bottled, labeled, packed, and shipped.
And I follow the roving trade. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey, 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 Nancy, oh. I went down through Galway City, Nancy whiskey I chanced to smell. I went in, sat down beside her. 7 long years I've loved her well. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey, 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 Nancy, oh. The more I kissed her, the more I loved her. The more I kissed her, the more she smiled. Soon I forgot my mother's teachings. Nancy soon had me beguiled.